You do terrifying amazingly well. And you're I have to ask,
Thank you.
such a nice person. You're very just low key, quiet. How do you write? Like terrifying, thrilling.
Well,
How do you do it?
Thank you. That's a great compliment. And, this is my 9th book, and I would say some of my previous ones are not as terrifying. But for me, my best comfort reading from a very young age, I would say from about age 10 up, was ghost stories. I just loved ghost stories. That was just my favorite kind of reading to do, just, at night to kind of relax. And even as I got older, when my taste in reading changed, and I was maybe reading more literary fiction, like high school, college, there was always something so irresistible about a ghost story that it took me a while, but I think of it as my first reading love. So it was a great honor and great fun to come back to it with this book. I did another adult book that had ghostly elements a few books ago. I think it was my 5th book, but that was more psychological. It was about early motherhood, and there was kind of a ghost in the story too, but I think the early motherhood stuff was really the scarier stuff. But this, I really wanted to jump into ghosts, it feeling like it could be a scary movie. So, yeah.
Yes, I can see the book as a movie. I mean, I loved it. So I want to ask about the title, because I love the title. And it kind of just, I love to wait for the title when I read a book to see when it comes.
Mm-hmm.
So was it always, when all the girls are sleeping?
No. For most of the book's life, as a draft and everything, it was called The Shadow Season. And I thought I would get away with that. It's called The Shadow Season. There's even a line still in the book where somebody writes a letter and it says this, the shadow season of the school, is January and February, when it's usually the ghost, shows up. But after it was done, the publisher said, it's not really going to work for us. I can't remember the reasoning. They just didn't think it was going to be effective, I think, for a YA audience. So at that point, and I've had this experience many times, where I think they're going to take the title, and then at some point when they're about to develop the cover, they say, sorry, we need something new, and we're developing the cover, so let's come up with something else. So because they can't really do the cover until they know what words are going to be on it. But I just started going through the book looking for spooky lines, or there is some point at which the ghost refers to when all the other girls are sleeping, or something like that. And I just played with that, and we ended up using that. And it's my first title with girl, how that's been a big thing to have
Yes.
a title with girl in it. So it's interesting. And my editor said, I know there's all these books with girl in the title, but they work. People buy them, so we'll see what happens. But I liked the title just as well as The Shadow Season. But that's the story of the title.
I love the title, and I loved getting to the point in the book where there was the line, and I'm like, there it is. Yeah. So was it hard? Why did you go into YA? Because you were doing adult, and then you switched a little.
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, the first book I ever finished as an adult was young adult, but it didn't get published. It was kind of like my practice book that never got published. So I always knew I wanted to go back to it, even when I wrote several adult books in between. I just got lucky that the adult book I worked on after that had a really good hook. So that's the one that got published. So then after that, I did another adult book and another. But I always knew I would probably try the YA again. And in fact, in the meantime, a lot of people mentioned to me, why don't you do YA? Because even my adult characters tend to have a slightly adolescent voice or adolescent problems, or they're a little bit arrested, there's something about their adolescent past they've never gotten over. I mean, not universally, not all of them, but I just have a lot of characters like that. So it was suggested to me that I should try YA, and I finally did when my first YA was called The Leaf Reader, and it was about a girl who likes to read tea leaves, and it's through her tea leaf reading that she gets kind of embroiled in a missing person case. But the only reason I finally made the jump was that I thought I really wanted to do a book that had tea leaf reading in it, because I really enjoyed, my husband's grandmother would always do tea leaf readings for us. And at one point, when she was in her 90s, she gave me her little teeny tea leaf reading book that she used, or that she had first learned about, or I don't really know what her connection to that book was, but I always wanted to draw that into a book. And I just thought a YA audience might be more receptive to that than an adult audience might not want a whole book about like tea leaf reading. So that's how I initially made the jump, and it felt pretty comfortable, because I'd always been pretty familiar with YA, and I read adult and YA. I go back and forth reading it as well as writing it.
Well, so then talk about All the Pretty Things, because that was like one of our favorite books too. So this was the second one. So
yeah, that was the second one. And that was a little of a departure for me, because while it is suspense, to me, fundamentally, that book is really about relationships. It's about a highly dysfunctional relationship and between a father and a daughter. It's not biographical. It actually was inspired by some current events. Anyway, I won't go deeply into it, but so yeah, that's what that was. I actually, at the time I started writing it, before I was writing it, I was writing a book that had a lot about psychotherapy in it. So I was listening to a lot of podcasts about psychotherapy for a variety of reasons, like for research for this adult book that had psychotherapy in it. And a theme that I heard coming up over and over again, often with people who would call into these podcasts or would be guests of these podcasts who knew a lot about therapy, is they would talk about how they had a highly narcissistic parent. And that was just a theme I had never thought about very much before. Like, what would it be like to have a parent who's just totally unable to focus on parenting, but they're just totally focused on themselves? So I just wanted to explore that theme, but with a teenage character, like a character who's grown very used to her parents' narcissism and what that does to her. And then I kind of put a suspense plot into it. But for me, that book was very much about the relationship.
So when all the girls are sleeping, you bring so much into it. It's how girls get along, how kind of an elite type of school acts and covers things up, and you have the mystery, but then you have the ghosts. How did you put it all together? And were they all a part of it from the beginning?
No, I mean, of course, what I started with was the college I went to, Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. It's an all women's college, and I had a good experience there. But there was this dormitory that everybody talked about as being haunted, and that was the initial inspiration. I was just thinking about that dorm and all the stories people would tell about it. It was interesting to me to learn as I was researching, starting the book, that a lot of the stories people told in the 90s weren't the same stories people told, say, in the 70s. And I heard someone say that nobody ever told ghost stories there at all in the 60s. So I was interested in that idea of how these stories change over time. I knew I wanted there to be this idea of a person who's not really used to this elite setting, a girl who, doesn't maybe have all the resources that her peers do, and her just trying to survive in that setting, just trying to get by. And that's a theme that comes up in a few of my YA books, is a person, just this character who's not of great privilege, but with people who have a little more privilege than her. I definitely wanted that to be a part of it. But yeah, there was a lot about girl dynamics that I knew I wanted to put in the book. When I started, I didn't know how it would all turn out. But yeah, there was just a lot I wanted to put in, like this idea of, not to get too deep into this, but like poltergeists, and how in the 60s and 70s, when there were a lot of stories on poltergeists, about poltergeists, it was often blamed on girls. Like, oh, there's always an unhappy girl somewhere around who's just causing all the poltergeist activity, or the poltergeist is attracted to adolescent girls. And to me, that's a very creepy idea, maybe kind of a misogynistic idea, but I also just wanted to put that in. It was like, you know, why is there that dynamic where people have often in the past, like people who study, you know, these spiritualist topics often associate girls, particularly adolescent girls, with ghosts. So, and I thought that would be interesting to a teen audience. Since those topics have sort of fallen out of favor, I just thought some teen readers would be interested to hear about it and read about it and have that kind of be explored. Like, is it just, you know, the dynamics between the girls is so like negative in a hidden way that they can't express, that it comes out in a different way? Or, you know, I wanted to put all of those things in. You know, it was a very messy process. This was a long revision process to kind of fit everything in.